Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. So we do have round 4 of the Grand Prix, and I have a nice game here to show you guys. And I did remember the novelty because I forgot it like literally the last 2 games. I'm getting back into the swing of things. I've been gone for a minute, so I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. To all of my people in the Philippines, of course, I will say mabuhay to you. Magandang umaga, magandang hapon, magandang gabi, magandang araw. Whatever time it is for you when you watch this video, I appreciate the likes and the comments. Keep them rolling. It can be something as simple as a thumbs up or like a heart or, even some periods, like whatever you want to put. But it just helps my videos, get out there a little bit more. So I appreciate you guys very much. Anybody who is coming from Cuba or who does speak Spanish, I will say, hola, ¿cómo está? Muchas gracias para ver mi YouTube. Muchas gracias. Let me see. Bienvenido a mi YouTube. For anybody who might be brand new, I appreciate you guys very much. Yeah, I already got English covered. It's my native one. But yeah, man, if you guys are ready to go, let's see what we got for this 4th round game. All right, so we got e4, e5, knight comes to f3, we got knight to c6, bishop to c4, bishop to c5, castles, and then we do have knight to f6, and we got d3. Now, there are many different ways to get to this opening, but it is known as the Giuoco piano and also as the Giuoco pianissimo. And in Italian, that means quiet game is Giuoco piano, and Giuoco pianissimo is going to be very quiet game for all my Italian people out there. There's not like a gigantic difference between the two of them, and the crazy thing is, even though it is, called the quiet game or the very quiet game, it's not, they're very rarely quiet. Usually one side wins over the other. It's not a very drawish thing. So it's not like a Berlin or anything like that. That's kind of notorious for drawing, but we do have d6, all very typical stuff. I mean, we're trying to get our bishops out. And we are trying to develop, get castle and develop the rest of our queen side and everything. So we do have c3. C3 is multi-purposeful. I mean, you really don't want the knight to hop down, especially to like a b4 situation. C3 is just restricting movement of that knight. It's definitely something that you want to be paying attention to because these knights are very well placed on their ideal squares, f6 and c6. But, it's always nice to try to get a knight, into, your opponent's camp. And C3 is just doing a good job at making sure that, that knight does not fulfill its dream. And then also, too, I mean, if this bishop is attacked, you do have the ability to kind of tuck it down on C2. We got A5. Rook comes to E1. We see bishop back to A7. Knight B to D2. So, with these positions being closed like this, you're just going to see kind of a lot of maneuvering of pieces. You're not going to see like a lot of, tactics and like blazing attacks. But, like I said, just some maneuvering. So that's what you kind of see coming up here. We got castles by black. We see H3 preventing bishop to G4. We see bishop to E6, asking white does it want to trade or what. So we do see bishop up to b5. We see knight back to e7. We got d4. Knight comes to g6. We see bishop down to a4. And then we do see the novelty of the game, which is knight to h5. But I mean, even though this is a novelty, this is a very like common theme. If you have like, King's Indians or something like that, stuff like that, or maybe like a Pierce or Modern or something, it is very, logical to try to like, pop some knights down there. Like I said, you are trying to get, your knights, ensconced on your, in your opponent's position. So f4 would be a beautiful square. And then at some point, maybe you can kind of like, swing your queen over and you have a lot of, threats. You got a lot of attacks on this h3 point. There's a lot of tactics in there. The knight comes down to f1. And then we do see knight h to f4. We see knight up to g3. And knight to g3, you're trying to put your knight on a better square. But then also, like I said, with all those tactics, you are kind of trying to like block, the access to your king. On these files. So the pawn takes d4, knight takes d4. We see bishop taking d4, pawn taking d4, and then we do have d5. And I mean, because white has this really, really nice pawn center established, so black is going to try probably either like a f5 or a d5 situation just to try to like disrupt things and break things up. So, like I said, d5 comes, queen comes to f3. We see queen over to f6. We see bishop down to d1. You know, we are hoping to, you know, if this knight moves, you know, and the queen tries to take, we are trying to take back. That way we don't damage our structure and isolate a pawn. So we do see queen down to h4. And as you guys can see, I mean, you know, there is a lot of heat, you know, on this king side. You got the bishop, you got the queen. Like, there's just so much stuff. Like, you kind of feel like something has to give at some point. And so the bishop does come to d2. We see c6, just solidifying your structure on the queen side. A rook comes to c1. We see f5, like I said before. You know, now black is like full on trying to make sure that we, you know, chip away at this nice structure that we have. d4, e4. Pawn takes f5, bishop takes f5. We see knight taking f5, rook taking f5. And it's still pretty much more of the same as far as black is concerned. I mean, black has a slight edge in this position, just simply because, I mean, you kind of have all these pieces just kind of like, you know, on the back rank. And it's not ideally where you want the pieces to be. I mean, you really kind of want this bishop to be here, you know, that you can like control this diagonal, be at least pointing to the king. You know, the queen maybe developed a little bit further out into black's position, but since you have more of kind of black's pieces coming into white's position, you know, that's kind of where that you know, that's kind of where that advantage comes from. You know, you don't, as far as like the material is pretty even for each side. So, I mean, it's not like either side is really doing better, but, you know, white does have the double bishop, but because the position is still somewhat closed, you know, you don't really have, you know, the greatest ability to you know, kind of use the bishop pair. Plus, you just kind of have these knights just too great in your position. We do see queen over to g3. You know, like I said, something has to give. You know, you really want to kind of, you know, trade off some piece because you have way too many black attackers in your area of the board as white. So the queen takes on g3, pawn takes on g3, which might look kind of strange because like, man, you know, you're damaging your structure, but you are doing actually very good. The knight does come to d3. So, you know, this looks kind of iffy. I mean, this was the thumbnail that I used, and you're thinking like, man, okay, I just got forked on my rooks. But there is actually a really nice move that white has in this position, and it's really like an only move. It's a really nice Zwischenzugs move to find in this position. So if you can find that move, if you want to go ahead and pause the video and try to find that move, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So, you guys know that, I mean, you know, usually when you have to try to find a Zwischenzugs move, you really kind of have to find like a check or like a really, really like attacking, you know, in between move. And so if you came up with the move bishop to c2, you would be absolutely correct, because one thing you would be noticing as white is that black's, you know, rook is undefended, and you can kind of x-ray through this knight and attack the rook. You know, if it was to take either one of your rooks, and especially if you have a situation like the knight takes down here, you would be taking back on f5, and you guys can see that this knight doesn't have anywhere to go. I mean, you're pretty much going to be forced to take here because that's the only way you can try to get any material. But you actually, I mean, you have this in this a nice Zwischenzugs move, and then the king can move somewhere, and then you capture on g2. So, I mean, you know, you're just up. You have double bishops and, you know, you are, well, you have double bishops. You are actually down a pawn, but you're going to be winning the piece back. And you can also do it immediately if you'd like to. And then you can see that you just have an extra piece for a pawn. So you're good to go. So, like I said, if you did guess bishop to c2, you would be absolutely correct. Like I said, there really literally wasn't anything. I mean, attacking the rook this way is just not as good. You know, you still have the attack on both of these rooks, so you're going to be winning that. So I mean, the rook swinging over here, rook f, actually moving this rook back would be it. You still have that fork down here on these rooks, so you're good to go. So after the bishop came to c2, we saw another Zwischenzugs move, rook down to f2. You know, like I show you guys all the time in these games, you know, you always see like each side doing a very good job of noticing when the opponent has an undefended piece and trying to attack it. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be a Zwischenzugs move, but you know, just noticing that your opponent has an undefended piece usually is enough to try to like figure out like a really good move in the position. So once you get past the opening, you know, you need to be looking for things like that, even in the opening. I mean, sometimes you can have the opportunity there. So, like I said, the rook came down to f2. We saw bishop taking d3. Of course, rook taking d2. You know, bishop taking g6, pawn taking g6. And then we do see rook up to e7. And, I mean, it might kind of seem like, man, I'm going to get my rooks up here. But black is actually going to be doing the same thing. So, after the rook takes on b2, you have rook c to e1, rook over to f8, rook to d7, rook f to f2, and then rook e to e7. So as you can see, both sides have pretty much done the same thing. The only major difference is black has an extra pawn in this position. You know, they're actually just, you know, just doing a little bit too great. So the rook takes on g2. So this is another pawn that black is able to win. The king comes to f1. We see king down to h7, trying to make sure that we sidestep, you know, the checks and stuff like that. So we do have h4, and you do kind of have to be careful here because you definitely can get mated. You know, if you do something like get pawn hungry after rook takes a2. You take on g7 with check. If the king does step down here, this is automatically mate. But I mean, there really wasn't much better to do. What we actually saw in the game was king down to h6. But this allows black to set up a really dominant, a further dominant position. After the rook comes down to e5, we see rook b to f2 with check. The king goes to e1, rook takes on a2, and we are threatening mate here. So the king has to sidestep over to f1. Because, you know, if you don't, I mean, obviously either one of these rooks coming down is going to be mate. So the king sidesteps over. After the rook goes to h2, we see the same thing, rook going over to g1. And then after the rook a goes to g2 with check, the king steps over to f1. We see rook to b2, king over to g1, rook h to d2. We actually see white resigning in this position here. So Wesley So did win this game. And I mean, okay, some of you guys might be wondering, like, you know, you're looking at the position. I mean, you are down a bunch of pawns, but like, I mean, maybe there's something that you can do. There's actually zero that you can do in this position because you're going to have to be in complete defense mode as white in this position. One of the possible things that you can do is actually go king to f1. You're having to do this because, you know, you have to allow your rook to sit next to your king if you block a check. Because obviously, if you're back here still, you know, and one of these rooks checks, you're going to have to just basically just throw your rook in the way and it's just going to get taken for free. Either that or you would have to do something like a rook over to f7. You know, you have to make a situation where one of these rooks can sit next to your king. So at least it can block the check. But, I mean, black doesn't really have to do anything. I mean, they can just start pushing pawn. Even pushing this pawn. You know, they have so many outside pass pawns over here that they're just basically just going to keep their rooks on this 7th rank and keep this king immobile. That is all that, you know, white is going to be able to do is basically just move back and forth. You know, like I said, I mean, you have moved either your king or the rook in a defensive position. So you are not attacking black at all. And you are just down way too many pawns. So, of course, Leinier Domínguez Pérez, seeing this, he's like, man, I don't want any of that. So he goes ahead and throws in the towel. So that is that game. So Wesley So has taken over the lead, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that is what I read. He definitely has. I think chess.com took over Chess Bomb, which is like what I used to use to like follow tournaments. And I don't really look up tournaments that way. So I'm not really sure like kind of who's in the lead and stuff. I got to go through more research on that. But I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Muchas gracias, mis amigos. Me quiero tayo mamaya, ingat lagi, mabuting pagbati, and I will see you guys next time.